It is August 15th, 1971. At first glance, it is a Sunday like any other. But inside the White House, behind locked doors, something unprecedented is unfolding. Richard Nixon had just flown back from Camp David aboard Marine One, his private presidential helicopter. He and his top advisors had been discussing the matter for the whole weekend. And now, the decision is made. The cameras are ready. Across the nation, unsuspecting families gather around their TVs to watch the popular primetime television series Bonanza when
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement from the President of the United States.
What Richard Nixon is about to do is to tell his nation some of the greatest lies in American history, accompanied by nothing less than a complete restructuring of the global financial system. It was the biggest peacetime power grab in human history. After this moment, America became the banker in a global game of monopoly and could never run out of money ever again. With the stroke of a pen, he cut the monetary link to gold and laid the groundwork for an all-powerful state that would be no longer financed by taxes, but by the monetary theft through inflation that would plunge his citizens and the rest of the world into debt slavery for decades to come. He opened the floodgates to a new era of global fiat money debasement. With no monetary restriction, pointless wars in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan became the norm that only benefits the military-industrial complex. The decisions made over half a century ago still haunt us today. The national debt has exploded. And it's not just a number, it's a burden on every American citizen. But the important question is, why on earth did Richard Nixon make this decision? To answer that, we need to go back a bit in history, because it wasn't supposed to go like this, not at all.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators.
The year is 1944. The Second World War is still raging, but the world is already thinking about what comes next. In a quiet resort town in New Hampshire, 44 countries meet to redesign the global economy. Out of that meeting comes a deal. The US dollar will be backed by gold. Every other currency will peg itself to the dollar. It's called the Bretton Woods system, and it makes the dollar king. But that crown comes with rules. $35. That's the price of 1 ounce of gold, fixed and guaranteed. Every dollar in circulation is supposed to be backed by real bullion in the vault. Objectively, a fairly healthy monetary system that keeps the money supply through the link to gold in check, which is a prerequisite for the value to remain stable. The only problem? A limited money supply makes it more difficult for governments to do what they like doing best, waging war. By the mid to late 1960s, the U.S. is embroiled in two costly wars: the Vietnam War abroad and the war on poverty at home. The costs for murdering foreigners and expanding welfare exceeded the actual gold reserves that are stored in Fort Knox. So the United States printed more US dollars than could actually be backed by gold in its vaults. That was the first domino that triggered a chain reaction, because there was one person who immediately recognized what the US was up to. France, 1965. President Charles de Gaulle isn't buying the illusion. He already knew years before Nixon's formal announcement in 1971 that Washington already broke the promise and prints more dollars than it has gold. In a fiery press conference, he calls out the United States, accuses it of exporting inflation and abusing its privilege.
Les États-Unis peuvent ne contracter des dettes à l'étranger sans pour autant s'endetter. Et plus nous détenons de dollars, plus nous finançons le déficit budgétaire américain.
He demands a return of gold, real money, not paper promises.
L'or ne change pas de nature. Il peut être transformé, divisé, fondu, mais rien d'autre ne peut être fait avec lui. Il n'a pas de nationalité.
And he doesn't stop at words. French naval ships dock in New York, loaded with dollars, and leave with tons of physical gold bars. France is just the beginning. Germany, Switzerland, and even Britain start cashing in their dollars. And by 1971, the tipping point is reached. Behind the scenes, panic is setting in. The U.S. is on the verge of being exposed. There are too many dollars and not enough gold. If even a fraction of foreign holders redeem their notes, the whole illusion collapses. Nixon's team has two options. Either keep the gold window open and risk total depletion, or slam it shut and pretend it's all under control.
Good evening, Mr. President. What's the occasion?
Hello, Arthur. I know you're not going to like this, but we've made the decision to suspend gold convertibility. I know this isn't your preferred route, but the situation left us no choice. We are announcing it tonight. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
One sentence, delivered with calm finality. It sounds harmless, sensible even. At least if you don't see through the countless half-truths, strategic pretexts, blatant deceptions, and outright lies in Nixon's 18-minute speech. But Arthur Burns, chairman of the Federal Reserve, obviously knew that this was not just a policy adjustment. It was a financial coup. He was shocked and upset that he and the Federal Reserve had not been involved in the decision. Publicly, he remained loyal, but internally he called it a terrible mistake, because he knew what fatal consequences this decision would have for decades to come. He was one of the few who could correctly assess the historical significance of this announcement, because in the general public it did not receive nearly the attention it deserved. There were no headlines screaming collapse, no riots, no markets crashing on live TV. But inside the vaults of central banks from Frankfurt to Tokyo, silent alarms went off. In the blink of a broadcast, the post-war economic order collapsed without a single consultation. The deal that had underpinned global trade for decades, dollars convertible to gold, was dead. Nixon called it temporary. Everyone knew that was a lie. From Paris to Bonn, ministers scrambled, confused and outraged. They held billions in U.S. dollars that were now backed by nothing but American credibility. Even some of Nixon's closest advisors and economic policymakers were appalled, shocked, or at least deeply concerned. But not John Connally, Nixon's Treasury Secretary. Rome, November 1971. The air in the conference room in Rome was heavy with unspoken anger. The finance ministers of Europe and Japan demanded answers. They held billions in dollars, now worthless against gold, their currencies in turmoil. The French minister spoke of fraud.
C'est de la fraude.
The German demanded justice.
Wir fordern Gerechtigkeit.
John Connally, the finance minister of the U.S., listened patiently to the tirades. Then, in his typical Texan manner, he uttered the words that silenced the room.
The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem.
He gives them reality. The United States had just rewritten the rules, and there would be no apology, no negotiation. The dollar, once a shared standard, was now a sovereign weapon, unpegged, unbound, and unapologetically American. To the Europeans, it sounds like betrayal. To Connally, it's just math. The world runs on dollars and America prints them. If that creates inflation abroad or destabilizes foreign currencies, that's not Washington's problem. And he was right, until he was not. When Nixon closed the gold window, he opened another one. A window of endless credit, endless debt, and endless inflation. For ordinary Americans, the most tragic part was how little they understood what had happened to them. The theft was quiet, bureaucratic, and permanent. And today, The story of the abolition is just a forgotten footnote, but the effects are more present than ever. Since 1971, the dollar has lost about 90% of its value. In 1972, Nixon won his re-election in a historic landslide, which marked the beginning of the only successful political formula, which is to increase government spending financed by inflation. Year after year, the dollar bought less, and no one seemed to notice that the very foundation of their prosperity had been stolen in this one Sunday night in August. Without monetary restrictions, wars became politically convenient. It doesn't matter what kind of war it is. A war abroad, a war against poverty at home, a war against pandemics, emissions, or, most ironically, a war against economic crises and inflation. When one considers the implications of this decision, it is arguably no exaggeration to claim that this measure was one of the most criminal and disastrous acts of government in post-war history. It was the beginning of a new era, one not built on gold, but on trust. The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Satoshi Nakamoto, creator of Bitcoin. Click on the video on the screen to learn more about the equally criminal founding of the Federal Reserve, which laid the groundwork for the abolition of the gold standard.